Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
That day, I had a morning meeting with a new client that stretched way longer than I expected. By the time I wrapped it up, I was already behind schedule. I had a photo shoot across town that I needed to get to, and the window between the two was tight. I hadn't eaten anything since early that morning, and my stomach was making sure I knew about it. I was driving and watching the clock on my dashboard when I spotted the McDonald's up ahead. Not my first choice, but it was fast, cheap, and right on the way. I pulled into the drive-through lane. When I got to the speaker, the worker greeted me and asked what I wanted. I told her I'd take a medium meal. She immediately tried to upsell me, asking if I wanted to upgrade to a large for $2 more. I told her no thanks, and that the medium was fine. She told me to pull up to the first window. I grabbed my wallet as I rolled up. The cashier gave me a total that felt a little high, but I was already pressed for time, so I handed over my card without questioning it. When I asked for a receipt, she told me the printer was broken. That was odd, but I let it go and moved up to the second window. The worker handed me a bag and a large drink. I looked at it and told her I had ordered a medium, not a large. She apologized and said she'd grab the manager. A woman with a manager tag showed up at the window. I explained the situation, telling her I'd ordered and paid for a medium but was handed a large, and that I just wanted what I actually ordered. She told me they didn't do refunds. I told her again that I wasn't asking for a refund, just the correct order. She repeated herself and told me I'd need to take the large. That's when it all clicked. Back in my college days, I worked fast food for a while, and I'd seen this kind of thing before. Some locations run internal competitions or quotas around upselling. Whoever pushes the most large meals hits a target or wins something. It explained the inflated total, the conveniently broken receipt printer, and now a manager digging her heels in over something that should take 30 seconds to fix. I told her I understood if there was some kind of sales push happening, but that it wasn't okay and that I hadn't agreed to pay for a large. She told me I was holding up the line and that I needed to move along. I pulled out my phone and told her that if she wasn't going to fix the order or refund the difference, I was going to call my bank and start a chargeback, and that she'd be able to explain the whole thing to them directly. Her expression shifted immediately. She started saying there was no need to get the bank involved and that they could work something out. But I had already dialed and put it on speaker. The automated system started going through its prompts. I watched her eyes flick to the line of cars stacking up behind me, then back to me. She gave in. She told me they'd refund the difference and give me the medium, and asked me to please hang up. I ended the call and told her that was all I'd been asking for from the start. She disappeared from the window for a minute and came back with a medium drink and a few dollars in change, holding them out without making eye contact. I counted the change. It was right. Then I asked her if I could get a receipt now. Her jaw tightened, but she turned around, printed one out, and handed it to me without a word. I looked it over carefully before driving off. The receipt showed I had been charged for a large meal despite ordering a medium, which confirmed that this wasn't just a mix-up at the window. Someone along the way had deliberately rung up the wrong size. I made it to the photo shoot with a few minutes to spare. While I sat in the parking lot waiting for the crew to set up, I pulled up the McDonald's corporate website on my phone and filed a detailed complaint. I included everything: the upsell attempt at the speaker, the inflated charge, the broken printer excuse, the refusal to correct the order, and the fact that the receipt itself showed I was charged for something I never agreed to buy. I also mentioned that this felt like a pattern and not an isolated mistake. The next day, I got a call from the district manager. He apologized and told me the location had actually been on their radar for a little while due to unusual upsell numbers in their reporting. My complaint, along with the receipt I had described, gave them something concrete to work with. He told me they'd be conducting a review of the staff and their sales practices at that location. He also offered me a gift card as a goodwill gesture, which I accepted. About 3 weeks later, I drove past that same McDonald's. Different face at the window. New manager on duty. And for what it's worth, The drive-through line was moving a lot faster than I remembered. My fiance and I met at a local coffee shop. I remember spilling my latte trying to reach for a napkin, and he caught the cup before it hit the floor. We talked for 2 hours that day. He's a firefighter, calm under pressure, the kind of person who just makes you feel safe. After 2 years of dating, he proposed on a hiking trail in the mountains, got down on one knee right at the summit, and I said yes before he even finished the sentence. I want to give you some context about Karen before I get into what happened. She was his ex-girlfriend from college. They dated for about a year, and according to him, it ended because she was possessive and controlling. He said she had a hard time accepting that the relationship was over, but that was years before we met, so I never thought much of it. Then she started showing up places. A restaurant we liked, a farmer's market we visited on weekends, always with some convenient excuse. I tried to be understanding. People live in the same city, things overlap. I even invited her to our engagement party, thinking the mature move was to just include her and let things settle naturally. That was a mistake. She spent the whole night making little comments. My dress was interesting. My hair was bold. At one point, she told a mutual friend that I seemed like a temporary phase for him. My fiancé noticed and pulled her aside and asked her to stop. She smiled and played innocent. By the end of the night, both of us agreed she wouldn't be invited to the wedding. Which brings me to the week before the ceremony. I was at the bridal shop for my final dress fitting. My mom and my maid of honor were both with me, and the mood was genuinely wonderful. The dress was an off-white mermaid gown with lace detailing along the bodice, and when I put it on, I felt like a completely different version of myself in the best way possible. We were laughing, taking pictures, the whole thing. I stepped into the dressing room to change back into my regular clothes, and that's when I heard commotion outside. When I came out, I stopped completely cold. Karen was standing over my wedding dress, which had somehow ended up on the floor, holding a pair of scissors. The bodice was already shredded. She was working on the skirt. I screamed at her, demanding to know what she was doing. She looked up with no panic, no guilt, just this wild, unhinged stare like she'd been waiting for me to see it, and told me I didn't deserve him and that he was supposed to be with her. I looked at the dress on the floor, something I had picked out, paid for, saved for, 3 days before my wedding. I asked her if she was out of her mind, pointing at the ruined dress and asking if she had any idea what it had cost. She said she didn't care, that I had stolen him from her and that she was making sure I wouldn't have my perfect day. I told her I hadn't stolen anyone, that they had broken up years ago and that he had chosen to be with me and that she needed to get over it. She called me a liar and insisted he still loved her and was just confused. At that point, I was done trying to reason with her. I walked right up to her face and told her to listen carefully, that he didn't love her and never would, and that she needed to accept that and move on instead of standing in a bridal shop destroying someone else's property like a lunatic. That was apparently the wrong thing to say because she screamed and lunged at me with the scissors still in her hand. Everything slowed down. I saw the blades coming toward me, and I genuinely did not know what was about to happen. And then my mom moved. Here's the thing about my mom. She's 5'2", soft-spoken, spends most of her time gardening. She looks like someone who would bake you a casserole when you're sick. What she does not look like is a former martial arts instructor, which is exactly what she is. She taught for years before retiring. In one motion, she caught Karen's arm, twisted it behind her back, and used Karen's own forward momentum to flip her completely over. Karen hit the floor hard, and the scissors clattered across the tile. Then came a loud pop, and Karen let out a scream that I'm pretty sure the whole strip mall heard. My mom stood over her and told her plainly that was what happened when you messed with her daughter. Karen was on the floor clutching her shoulder, sobbing. My mom had dislocated it. 2 police officers came through the door, maybe 2 minutes later. They looked at Karen on the floor, looked at my mom standing calmly with her arms folded, and pieced it together pretty quickly. One of them told Karen she was under arrest for assault with a deadly weapon and destruction of property. Even being led out in handcuffs with an injured shoulder, Karen was still yelling, insisting this wasn't over and that he would eventually see she was the one for him. The second officer told her flatly to save it. Once she was gone, the adrenaline wore off fast. I looked at my dress on the floor, 3 days before my wedding. I sat down and started crying. My mom knelt beside me and told me not to worry, that we would figure something out. My maid of honor crouched down on my other side and promised me that woman was not going to ruin my wedding. The shop owner had been quietly looking at something in the back during all of this. She came out and told us she thought she might have something that could help. She said there was a dress in the back that had never been picked up, that the bride who ordered it had eloped and never came back for it. She said it was a similar silhouette to mine, a different size, but that if I was willing, she would work overtime to alter it before the wedding. I asked her if she would really do that. She said no bride deserved to have her day ruined over someone else's jealousy, and added with a smile that she had never seen anything like what my mom had just done, and that altering a dress was the least she could do. We all laughed, and some of the tension in the room finally broke. My mom looked quietly proud of herself and a little embarrassed, and said she supposed those years of training hadn't been completely wasted after all. The shop owner spent the next 2 days altering the dress. We took turns bringing her coffee and food, and when I tried it on the morning before the wedding, I actually gasped. It was stunning. Honestly, more beautiful than the original. Karen ended up facing charges for assault with a deadly weapon and destruction of property. Last I heard, the court also ordered mandatory counseling, which honestly feels like the bare minimum. The wedding was everything I wanted. My mom became a minor celebrity at the reception, with half the guests asking her to demonstrate the move. She declined every time, smiling and saying she'd rather not add any more dislocated shoulders to her wedding weekend count. During our first dance, my husband leaned in close and whispered that he had already changed the locks at the house, just in case. I laughed so hard I nearly stepped on his foot, and as we swayed there, I thought about the whole ridiculous, terrifying, somehow perfect week leading up to that moment, and I couldn't stop smiling. 8th grade was supposed to be a normal year. Instead, I spent a huge chunk of it in bed. I got seriously sick. Not the kind of sick where you miss a week and catch up on homework. The kind where the doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with you for months, and your whole life just stops. I missed nearly half the school year. And even when I was finally allowed back, I could only do half days for a while because my body still wasn't up to full speed. I tried to keep up with the work while I was home. I really did. But I'm the kind of person who needs to actually be in the room to absorb things. I need to hear the explanation, see the teacher work through the problem, ask questions on the spot. Doing worksheets alone in my bedroom while feeling awful just wasn't cutting it. By the time the year ended, my grades were rough. So when I started high school, they placed me in the easier classes. I didn't fight it. It made sense given where my grades were. But here's what changed everything. My doctors had finally figured out what was wrong with me, found the right medication, and I was genuinely feeling better for the first time in what felt like forever. I had energy again, I could focus, and I was angry about the time I'd lost in the best possible way. I was ready to work. Starting at Westfield High came with its own challenge though. The city line ran right along our back fence, which meant every single one of my old classmates went to the other school. I walked into high school completely alone. No familiar faces, no built-in friend group, nothing. Most of these kids had grown up together since elementary school, and I was the outsider trying to wedge myself in. It took time, but I found my people. Most of them were in the marching band, even though I wasn't. We clicked anyway, and for a while, everything felt really good. My grades climbed. I was pulling nearly straight A's, getting moved into harder classes, and genuinely enjoying school for the first time in a long time. I had no idea someone was keeping score. Sophomore year was brutal in its own way. Because I'd started in the easier classes, I had to take both algebra and geometry at the same time to catch up. Math is already my weakest subject on a good day, so doubling up felt like some kind of academic punishment. I pushed through it barely, and came out the other side. But I was so deep in survival mode that I wasn't paying attention to anything except my own classes. What I didn't know at the time was that my grade point average had been climbing fast enough to push me into the top 10 of my class. I had no idea that even mattered to anyone other than me. To me, it was just proof that the hard work was paying off. To Karen, it was apparently a personal problem. Karen was in the marching band with some of my friends. We weren't close, barely talked actually, but she was around enough that I knew who she was. She was sharp, driven, and very aware of where she stood in the class rankings. What I didn't know was that she had been sitting at number 10 for a while, and somewhere along the way, I had bumped her out of it. It wasn't until junior year that I found out I had apparently made an enemy. We were sitting in our college prep class, the one they ran to help us get ready for the standardized tests, and one of my friends just casually dropped it into conversation like it was common knowledge. She told me that if I did well on the test, Karen would finally have to stop going around telling people I had cheated my way into the top 10. I stopped and stared at her. I had absolutely no idea what she was talking about. Everyone at the table, there were about 9 of us, went quiet and started exchanging looks. Then one of them just laid it out plainly. She said Karen had been telling people that I only got good grades because I'd taken the easy classes freshman year to inflate my grade point average, and that she thought my ranking was basically fake. I sat there trying to process that. I genuinely hadn't heard a single word of any of this until that moment. Another friend jumped in and added that Karen had spent most of the summer talking about how once she beat my test score, it would prove I didn't belong in the top 10 in the first place. Apparently, this had been going on for over a year. People in our friend group had been hearing it the whole time, and nobody thought to mention it to me. I wasn't even angry at my friends for that. I was just stunned that this whole thing had been happening in the background of what I thought was a perfectly normal social situation. I asked them what Karen even thought would happen after that, like, did she expect to just take my spot? And nobody had an answer because there wasn't a logical one. Karen was genuinely smart. That was the part that confused me most. She didn't need to tear anyone down, she was already doing well. But somewhere along the way, she had decided that my success was an attack on hers, and she built this entire rivalry completely inside her own head, without ever saying a word to me about it. The worst part was that her whole argument didn't even make sense. Taking easier classes freshman year doesn't inflate your grade point average if you then spend the next 2 years taking harder ones. The advanced classes I moved into carried more weight, not less. If anything, the path I took made it harder to maintain a high average, not easier. But I wasn't about to go track Karen down and explain that to her. I tried to put it out of my mind when the test date got closer. I just studied and focused on doing the best I could. When the scores came back, Karen wasted no time. She went around telling anyone who would listen that she'd scored a 31. And honestly, that is an excellent score. She had every right to be proud of it. I didn't say anything about my own score. I knew she was going to ask me eventually. And I'll be honest, I wasn't feeling generous toward her at that point. After months of her quietly working to undermine me with our entire friend group, I was fine letting her walk right into it. At lunch, she stood up at the end of our table, looked straight at me, and announced her score loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, making it very clear she expected me to respond with mine. I congratulated her and went back to eating my lunch. She waited. Then, when I didn't offer anything else, she pushed and asked why nobody had told her my score yet, and whether I wanted to share it. I told her I didn't mind sharing at all. I got a 32. The shift in her face was immediate. That forced cheerfulness drained right out of her. She sat back down without another word. The table was quiet for a second, and then a couple of my friends had to look away because they were trying not to laugh. The friend group got a little awkward after that. Some people laughed about how it played out. A few felt sorry for her. Karen went quiet around me after that day. She didn't bring up rankings. She didn't bring up test scores. She didn't bring up anything related to academics when I was around. The whole rivalry she had built up just sort of collapsed the moment the one thing she was counting on didn't go her way. Senior year was mostly calm. I stayed focused, kept my grades up, and tried not to think about the fact that someone had spent the better part of 2 years trying to discredit me behind my back. When final rankings came out near graduation, I was fourth in our class, salutatorian. 3 people had perfect grade point averages and earned the top spots. I had worked myself from the remedial track to the top 5 of my graduating class, starting from behind because I'd spent 8th grade too sick to sit upright. Karen landed somewhere in the top 10. I never found out exactly where. I didn't need to know. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.